Governor Dukakis, for example, not only did things like stop massive highways from cutting through inner cities and pouring money into mass transit, but he was also known, and still is, for walking down the street and picking up litter and pouring money into public arts and programs for music, and little things like taking down the billboards in Massachusetts or putting telephone wires underground for the first time. And that became my inspiration. I went on at Harvard Business School, and I first started studying and writing about slums around the world and thinking about them, starting with right here in the United States in the South Bronx, to in Africa in Kibera, and in Durban, and in Mexico, in Guadalajara and Mexico City, and looking, and there's a gentleman from CEMEX here, on the microcredit finance and housing and programs with their Patrimonial Oi program, and favelas in Brazil, and then spending a lot of time in India in a slum, the largest slum in Asia, called Dharavi. And Dharavi is kind of interesting in that in the last 10 years, 10 million people have come into the slums of Mumbai, and 5 million have left. And they've gone into the middle class by Indian standards. And it's quite different from a lot of the other slums I've been studying. It's kind of more like my immigrants, or many of our immigrants from the United States, who came into the Lower East Side of New York. And I compare it to the Harry Potter sorting hat. They kind of find their way and into the middle class and begin entrepreneurial businesses. And it's a different mechanism. People are moving, as we just heard, big time into cities in the last many years. And and it's largely because, for example, in China, if you live in the city, on average, you make 5 times the income that you do from living in the countryside. And it's at least 3 times that in India. So I started broadening my research and looking at city building around the world, thinking about how do you build cities? What are the big issues that you need to think about? And to that end, I thought I would create an exercise for all of us to do as a group here at your table for 10 minutes, and I want you to build a city. And I've given you about the size of the city of Boston, downtown, 12 or 1,500 acres, actually. You all have this in front of you. And it's called, Mr. Prime Minister, Butrent City. Does that name? Butrent is a city that in Albania that has Augustus doubled in size after the Battle of Actium, after the defeat of Mark Antony and Cleopatra, but it's been around since Neolithic times. But your job is not only to decide where, using these stickies at your seat, to figure out what should be built where, but more importantly, in what order should it be built. And then we'll sit around in 10 minutes and talk, but to inspire you, since I love Rothko, I put some Rothko prints up, and I have some jazz, John Coltrane, ballads to play in the background. And you have 10 minutes at your table to be creative, and then I'm going to pick on a few of your tables to make a presentation to the group, and then we'll rip you apart, just as I do with my students. 1 per table. Is that okay? Or should we is that okay? So you'll have to figure it out. So we're going to start with Juan Carlos. And could you please step down front, and you can present. We'll put this up on the screen. I don't know which is prettier, the Rothko or your presentation. We'll see in a moment. But this, and maybe you can speak for a minute about what you planned and why. And maybe there's even a pointer we have. But oh well. Okay. Beautiful. Okay. So you have 1 minute to make your presentation, please.
Okay, 1 minute. Yeah, I'll try to go faster. First thing we did is to bring the metro line from the airport. So we have to build infrastructure on the land to support all the human development that is going to take place. And after that, we build a road to connect a main road to connect the existing highway to bring vehicles traffic and transportation and vehicles transportation. Then what we said is we're going to build retail. So we have low time residence of humans in the land development on the very early stages of the development. And then we went for, what is our number 4? A hotel district. Then we started building a park next to the river, or the coastline, sorry. Then we built the first high-rise apartments and a school, because kids don't travel that much. So we have to start building social infrastructure to support those families living there. Then we started light manufacturing to generate more employment together with the retail, the light manufacturing, and we brought the mixed income housing and the high-end residential housing. After that we have labor and demand, we bring the low-income housing, because those are the families that are more vulnerable, that require that the development is much more completed. And that is what we're not really doing. What we're really doing is bring first the poor people or the more vulnerable, and then to bring all the support. We build them a public school, clinic, a retail area, and a park. And that's all the time we had.
Thank you so much. Esther, please, for your group. Thank you, Juan Carlos.
Well, we did it a bit differently, because we followed the instruction of only saying the 7 things which were more important to be developed in this area. So the first thing we thought it was the metro, the same as the other group, because we thought that the first thing is to be really good communicated with the other parts, with the city and with the airport. Then what we wanted is to be a residential area and try to have some employment. We built a mixed residential area and also an office which is also mixed, also to have retail and to have apartments and shops and everything. Then what we thought is, what is the minimum requirements for a residential area, and it's a school and also a clinic. And then also to have it more vibe and to have more things in this area, what we thought is to have this technological park in order to bring employment and also to bring talent, and really near to the airport, so to be like more a technological city, and also the amusement part with the arts division in order to have more movement around the city. We left the other part to be built in the second phase, because we only could choose the 7 first priorities.
Thank you for following in the instructions. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Yes. Now, who is going to speak here on behalf of this group, please? Judan? Thank you. Do you want to stand up and let me put this in front? Is this the correct one?
No.
Thank you.
Our road is our road is not so beautiful. But we started first with the road, so we connected the old highway with the road. We put the road on the side, so we put the road on the side of the plot, not to destroy, let's say, the the whole area, and we put another road in the middle, so we created a city two parts, so we created access for all part of the cities. So the second thing that we thought to build is to build a technology park and offices that will generate works, because this is the reason why people, we believe, should come in this area. And the third thing is to start to build high-rising apartments in the residential area, so to provide a residential space for people that will come and to work. And the fourth thing is the social needs with school and hospital, and the retail. And the fifth one was the park and the government center. And the last one was the hotel.
First of all, I just want to congratulate all of you for being such good sports. Arthur asked you to design a city in 10 minutes. This is something that takes architects and urban planners months, if not years, to figure out. And even then, it's not always quite there. So I congratulate all of you. I'll just make a couple of comments on some things that we saw. So cities, great cities, all share certain elements in common. They have buildings, they have neighborhoods, they have public transportation, they have great public spaces, parks for people, and they have a great sense of urbanity, and they're very pedestrian friendly. And so very quickly I saw a couple of interesting things. Since I'm an architect, I have to tell you everything that you did wrong, but actually they weren't so bad, and I saw some really interesting things. Juan Carlos, the scheme that two of you mentioned the metro line coming in first, the subway station. That's really important because development will build and grow around public transportation. The idea of having a road that comes to the waterfront, that's really terrific, because from the highway, when you come into this new city, to have that visual connection and access to the waterfront, which could be a great, wonderful feature. I think there was a park at the end of there we go, thank you. So there was a park right on axis with the end of the street on the waterfront, which is terrific. That will become a wonderful heart of this new city. Also, this scheme talked about having residential and low-income housing that would come later once the industries are there, light industries, and places for people to live. And the fact that you also included a park in that neighborhood is really important, because having a variety of green spaces and public spaces, big, small, dispersed around the city, is really important to the vibrancy and the life of the place. If we go to the next scheme, the one that Esther presented, what was interesting here, I thought, was you're 10 kilometers from the airport, so people coming to Bothrotum are going to come by your site, come by this site first. So the idea of placing office buildings, technology park, where you see it instantly as you approach is terrific. It sets an identity, it lets people know that something's happening here, and it will make people want to come and see what else is going on. You also left it open for the second phase. That's what happens with real city planning. It is phased, and so it often will happen over time in manageable incremental components. And then the third scheme that we saw, again, this idea of the road that brings you to the waterfront is great. The idea of starting to mix uses, office, apartments, retail, to cluster those together, that's what really creates that dynamism, that 24/7 community, that sense of activity, putting those uses together so that people will live, work, and play. The boundaries are blurring now in terms of how we do that. So putting those components together starts to create a real sense of urbanity and a real sense of place. Also introducing the government center within the residential neighborhoods so that there's a civic life to the city, and the government is part of the life of the city, and that's a nice relationship on that plan as well. So I thought it might be interesting. We completed a plan. I'm going to have the clicker.
About that.
Perfect. I thought it might be interesting to show you the master plan for the Philadelphia Navy Yard. It has some interesting parallels with the site that you've been looking at. This is 3.5 miles south of Center City, Philadelphia. It's the same size as the Central Business District, former Navy site, 1,200 acres on the waterfront, but really cut off from everything by the highway. And so this was a public-private partnership. The original Navy base here was closed, wonderful historic buildings that are going to be repurposed. This was all a brownfield site. And so we created a master plan which has several key ideas to it. The first is that at the entrance to the site, this is Broad Street, which goes back to Center City, there's a gateway, there's a park, and a corporate campus to establish the identity for this place right off the bat. From there, we created a diagonal boulevard that takes you to past another park down toward this new waterfront district. We then brought the water's edge deeper into the site by creating a canal that's lined with waterfront development sites so that more buildings feel that they're engaged with the river and the waterfront, because the Navy kept certain facilities and the port facility had to remain here. The canal is also the heart of the stormwater management system for the entire Navy Yard site. Then we created a park deep in the interior of the site. This land is less valuable. It's up against industrial remnants and train tracks. It's lined with buildings, each of which have a parkfront address. It's also a recreational and amenity space for the entire Navy Yard site itself. And then in the center, there are academic quadrangles and residential districts, which will be developed over time. So here's a view from the entrance, looking down the diagonal, which has a tower at its terminus. Here is the historic warehouse district on the waterfront. Urban Outfitters now has their corporate headquarters there, 7 buildings and counting. A few images of buildings that are completed. Urban Outfitters, GlaxoSmithKline's corporate headquarters building, which we did, which is here. 30 other building projects underway, 10,000 jobs created in the last 10 years. Since the plan was adopted. And then finally, a quick note, a view from the water. There's no public transportation to this site yet. Access is all by cars and limited bus service. So density is really driven by parking, and it kind of straddles the urban and the suburban at the moment. But in the future, when the subway is extended, the Broad Street line will come here. All of these surface parking areas that you see on the plan, those become building sites to be developed. So any good master plan has to grow and change over time, and this allows for that to happen in the future. So I thought it was very interesting after Arthur sent me the game that this is something that we had been looking at recently, which had a lot of parallels.
And I know you have 2 cities that you've planned in China. One is for 9 million feet, and another.
Right.
And so this is not a frivolous exercise. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
And I'm sorry I didn't get to Megan. So we'll all come back next year to the center, or in the next few years. When will the new buildings?
Construction starts next summer, and it'll be finished 2 years after that.
Okay, so we look forward to seeing you, and we'll all then be able to critique you. So, you know, in the United States, we really built our cities with 2 experiences in mind. Coming out of Boston, I'm particularly sensitive to the mill towns of Lowell and Lawrence and Haverhill north of here that had serious cholera epidemics in the 1840s. And so we began throughout the United States to segregate our uses. Our zoning started saying we should keep work, play, homes, housing, and workplaces and shopping separate from one another. And that has prevailed, as opposed to in Europe, in American zoning ordinances ever since. And that, coupled with the automobile, which this forced us to make our cities more horizontal than they should, similar to what Ellis and I were talking about in Latin America, where they just spread out and further as we built these highways way far away from the core cities, which is causing all kinds of infrastructure and energy issues right now. What we've gone through is not a frivolous exercise. Over the next 25 years, says a geographer, Joel Cohen of Columbia University, we need to build a new city for 1 million people every week between now and 2040. We need to build cities a new city once a week for 1 million people, because that's how much urbanization is going on across the world. Maybe the United States is 81% urban. China is 51% urban. India is only 31% urban, and Africa is only 11% right now. So there's a lot of things that are going to be going on. And one thing I note, one of your board members is a great entomologist, a professor here who's on the board, advisory board of the center, named E.O. Wilson. If you've read his great works, he said, our urban existence has left us for a need for wilderness and the peaceful effect it has upon our souls. And all of you put in so many green parkland and green space that we so desperately need in our core cities right now, and we need to figure out how to preserve them going forward. Well, so we have 4 experts, and maybe I'll have these 4 experts sit in these chairs up here, and we can get started, and each of them will make a few comments, and hopefully we'll have time for comments and questions at the end. So, Mr. Prime Minister, if you could step up here, and all of you, as you know, as Prime Minister and formerly Mayor, he made art and public space so critical, as we'll see and hear, as you've heard a little bit already, in Tirana and in Albania. In fact, Picasso said art is politics. And we can see that firsthand. And how creating this new green space through demolition and so on actually reinvigorated its citizenry. Ellis Juan from the Inter-American Bank thinks about creating new cities, new models for cities throughout Latin America. He's worked with 40 different cities. And he will speak about how important mobility is. And again, this issue that I was just referring to, how in the United States we have this tradition where the automobile has taken over and we spread out our cities so horizontally. Asma, the mayor of, but I'll never pronounce it correctly, help me out.
Essaouira.
Essaouira.
That's right.
And I know you've said that several times in the last few days. But she's really been a leader in Morocco and in so many ways, but particularly in her city of making it such a great city, now a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Hi, Mohammed. And you should be very proud of the leadership that she has shown, not only in your city, but throughout the country and much of certainly North Africa. But again, as often through public art and what she has done that we'll hear from herself. And Mitch Weiss has really, for the last 5 years, is now a professor in public entrepreneurship at Harvard Business School. But for the last 5 years, we've seen what he's done in using this new technology that we all have in our pockets to connect. He calls it connectivity, to connect citizens with their government. And that seems to be a common theme. So why don't we get started? I guess you call it urban, when you spoke at 10 Downing Street, Professor Weiss was on urban mechanics, you called it. So let's hear about everyone's urban mechanics, and maybe we'll start with you, please, Mr. Prime Minister.
Thank you. By the way, I don't think to have a lot to tell in the sense of what you were discussing, because I didn't have the chance to start the city from scratch, and I didn't have a chance to work with a normal city that needed improvements. I had another type of chance to be elected mayor of a no man's land, and in a very special circumstance, after 10 years of freedom without institutions, during which people got their own revenge towards 50 years of dictatorship with no private property. So it was, there were 10 years of absolute unicality, I would say, in terms of the relation among human beings and and nature. So people occupied every possible free space in the city and tried to build in their own. So when I got elected, the city practically, the city I knew and the city I was born and the city I grew was disappearing behind a curtain of total anarchy. And so we lost every type of public space, we lost every meter square of green. The only river, we have a river crossing the city that we lost because on both of the river banks people built it. So practically you couldn't see the river anymore because it was like engulfed between two long trains of concretes. And we lost practically any sense of belonging to our common space. On the other hand, all the housing building were transformed in their appearance by hundreds of thousands of self-made architects from inside that were pushing the walls. Them were in the first floor, just transformed windows in doors and bedrooms in bars and kitchens in flower shops. Them were in the last floor, they broke the ceiling and added space. Them were in the middle, they transformed the balconies in part of their own space. So practically we lived a period of handmade deconstructivism. And becoming mayor in that situation was like being an authority that was not existing, and people were not at all recognizing the authority of the mayor, recognizing the presence of the municipality. The collection of local taxes was a kind of 4 or 5%. The budget was nothing point something. The garbages were everywhere. No one cared about collecting. So, what to do in this situation? And in that, I was blessed to be an artist, although I don't really believe that artists can necessarily be good politicians, but this is another topic. So I was blessed because I just thought that starting with some colors would maybe wake up people and would give people some points of reference. And at that moment, the European Commission was developing a project of kind of paving the sidewalks of the entrance road to Tirana and somehow fixing the facade, because all facades of housing were totally degraded. Nobody has put any hand on them. And the degrade came also by these interventions from inside. So everyone was changing the form of the buildings. So then I took this possibility and I said to the enterprise, we should paint these buildings with strong colors. And I defined the colors in the most anti-democratic way, and and then they started to paint. And I always remember this first, because this was the first moment that change happened. When the man called me, the guy of the enterprise, he was totally shocked. He said, Mr. Mayor, there's something terrible happening in the road. I'm surrounded by, I don't know, hundreds of people that are having terrible reactions. Some are laughing, some are screaming to me, and it's like a big traffic jam, and everybody is around me. I said, why? What they want from me? He said, we have started to paint this orange facade. And no, it's not this, but this came after when we were more relieved. In front of you mentioned Mark Rothko, and it was exactly like a Mark Rothko orange square in the midst of a totally gray from dust facade, and we're about 20 meter squares of orange that created all this mess. And so the European Commission called me. You know, the embassy of European Commission called me and said, "What is this? It's outrageous." I said, "What's the problem?" And they said to me, "We should immediately meet the supervisor. Who was a French guy. He is ready to resign. This is totally this is scandal." I met with the supervisor. He got even more orange in his face than the facade. And he said to me, "Mr. Mayor, you should stop it immediately. The European Commission can never pay for it." I said, "Why?" He said, "Because it's out of any European standard." And I said, "Okay, tell me what is within the European standard in this city, and then we can continue discussion. So do you see anything in the European standard that's, and how comes that you are not shocked from everything you have seen since you are here, and you are shocked from this 20 meter square of orange?" He said, "This is, the rest we can be discussed. This is out of discussion." I said, "Okay, if you will not pay for it, you cancel it, I'll make a press conference." It will be my first press conference. I will say, "I'm shocked because the European Commission seems to me like this Stalinist commission censoring art in exhibitions and saying orange is too hard or blue is too deep." And he said, no, don't do this. We can negotiate. We should find a compromise." I said, "No, compromise is always gray, you know." So there's no, because in the color theory, compromise is gray. If you mix the three basic colors together, you have a deep gray. So there is no way to compromise. And at the end, you know, they took their time, and we continued to paint. And it became incredible, because in the poorest country in Europe, with all the problems possible, the big topic was colors. And in all radio shows, TV shows, streets, bars, Tirana, Albania became like a big cafe in Montmartre during Impressionism. Everybody talking about colors, what the colors are doing to us, you know. And I started to worry, because people that were the loud minority was very loud. So in the parliament, they had sessions, and they were, you know, kind of screaming out of it. And then I made a poll, which was very revealing to me. I said, let's make a poll, because here we are burning everything, maybe. And it was very interesting, because 63% of people, there were two questions: do you like it, and do you want it to continue or to stop? 63% of people said, yes, we like it. But half of them who didn't like it wanted it to continue. So 85% of people said, no, continue. So it was like, do you like it? No. You want it to stop? No, continue. You know? And it was like, so this was, and we continued, and then we had some fantastic collateral, not damage, but collateral profits, because we discovered that in the painted roads, people started to pay taxes. So, and people started, because all the shops, because it was a very high criminality at that time, all the shops had very heavy grids to be protected from theft and so on. They started to take off the grids and to put just glass. And I liked very much to interact with them. So I was saying, why you are changing that? And the answer was fantastic, because now it's safe. And I was saying, why safe? Has the national government brought more police? What police? No, we don't need police, we have colors. So this was the reaction, and then we had 100%, and I tell 100% tax collection, local tax collection from the shops in these parts of the city. And to conclude with it, after a while, Anri Sada, who is a former student of mine, very highly appreciated artist in the international art scene, came to Tirana to make a video to make together a film about what was happening. A film which is titled Dami Colori, and was then presented in Venice Biennale and was then bought by Tate in London. And he is not a typical Albanian when you see him. He's too blonde to be Albanian. And so to the people, he looked like a foreign journalist with his camera. And he came to me after shooting in the streets, and he said to me, there is something amazing. When I go to shoot in these areas where buildings are painted, people want to show up in front of the camera. When I go to shoot in areas that are not painted and that are still ugly, people don't want me to film. So being Albanian, he had to listen a lot about his mother when he was in the ugly environments, but he had to pretend that he was a foreign journalist. So he couldn't respond in Albanian. And at the end, I think it was about dignity and about pride. So people regained the sense of dignity in being part of community and in being part of common space. And then we continue with the other actions of demolishing illegal buildings and liberating public spaces. So in 11 years of my mayorship, but basically in the first 7, which were the most intense, we have demolished around 10,000 illegal buildings. And only from the riverbanks, we removed 123,000 tons of concrete and transformed them in green. And there also I realized that how important beauty is for communities and how much beauty can do that police cannot do. You know, in front of police, people, especially people in suburbs or in difficult areas, feel their instinct tells them to react brutally. In front of beauty, they are kind of paralyzed. They are like, and when we started to plant trees and to green the riverbanks, it was amazing because we didn't have money to do it at once, so we started with portions, and it was fantastic because people would walk and they would not throw anything where there was grass. Once the grass ended, they threw it just there. So fighting to tell that, putting them fines and telling them don't throw things was not working. So repressive measures were not working, but planting trees and making the ground with green was working. So I said to people, don't spend money, we should not spend money on going after people while they throw things, we should spend money on planting trees and grass. And so we remove garbages by pushing them through beauty, not through measures of repression. So my lesson from that was that beauty works, and more we invest in beauty and in culture, better is it. So this is my lesson.
The Indian poet said, "Beauty is truth's smile." Tagore. Asma, speaking of dignity, bringing dignity to a culture, to a city.
Yeah, I think I do share the same thing with the Prime Minister, Mayor. When I had this idea of being a candidate and going to, first you have to know that I never lived in Essaouira, apart of going on holidays, but I come from a village which is at 63 kilometers from Essaouira. And going back there and wanting to do something for the people, it's because since I was a child, my parents will take us on holidays, but when we will gather with the people, everybody, I mean, when I was at a certain age, when I was already working, and I will feel everybody hopeless and everybody like they dismissed. They didn't have any role in the city, and the city was governed by a governor who is nominated by the king, and election is just bullshit. There is nothing. And so I'm known to be very strong in reconciliation. So this is how I started, because I was brought up with 7 brothers. I was the only girl. And I remember I used to reconciliate my brothers when they would go on, you know, how it is in a big family. So my idea was, let's reconciliate the people of Essaouira with their city and let them see what they can do, I mean, as a citizen. And I think that was that easy, because I would never think that the first things that they didn't have any access. So, of course, for me the access was easy, because I had the position of belonging, I would say, to and having a. And the first things I had, which they didn't all have, I mean, I was educated, which they weren't. So that was a very big issue, education. I had access to health, or to private health, or to public health. They wouldn't have the access, because that was something very difficult. Schooling, their rights, their own rights, but how do they know their own rights if most of the population never went to school? And when I was elected in 2003, I wouldn't say if I had the chance or the malchance, but the bad chance, I had quite a big villages who were access to the urban, I mean, and those villages, I mean, when they will want to build up anything, they would never go and get any authorizations, the access to water, the access to electricity. So they become urbanized, but without having all the tools. So there were no tools. So when I got there in 2003, the first thing, okay, let's reconciliate them. But what you have to know also, it's serving a city. It's okay. Being a mayor, it's fine, but we function under the title of a minister of the interior until now. And it's a 6-year term, and anything happening in the town hall has to deal with the governor who is nominated. So there is the elected authorities, which I would say it's us, me and my 30 other elected people, plus the governor. And the bad thing also, what I found out, it's that being in a town hall, we do also have the office of the number 2 of the governor. So no one will come and, let's say, request or expect response for their demand, because everybody has to get through the Pasha, because his name is the Pasha. And of course, we're in a city when most of the people are very scared and frightened by the authority, with what it means. And we had like a kind of, because it was a marginalized city, which Essaouira is a very beautiful city. The chance, I think, it has been marginalized for over 20 years, and now it's becoming more fashion. But the fact that it has been marginalized, and the fact that also it was one of the poorest cities in Morocco. And when you see how it's located geographically, it could be one of the most beautiful cities in the world. So starting first by um, meeting with the citizen, and what I found out that there is plenty of associations, but no one would work with the other one. One would work against the other one because, of course, with the local authorities, I would say, they would put one against the other one. You know, it's politics. So first thing is to set a legal plan and to have them all gather, but with one idea, with the same aim, with the same goal. We are going to treat ourselves well, but to treat our city well. So to be all gaining, I mean, all the gain will go to the 85,000 people. So the first thing we did, and I think it was after an example for all the cities, it's to have the House of Citizen. So we established a House of Citizen, but once they had this legal plan, because we needed to be, I mean, to be working, but in a legal way. So, and then once we established this House of Citizen, they started coming anytime. At the beginning, they were very shy to come. Maybe someone will go and say, "What, you know, I mean, you're," because when I will meet with people and they will be asking me things, and I will say, "Well, if you want me to get to that, you will have to help me." And they say, "How can I help you?" I said, "By coming, by being interested, what's going on, by belonging to this community, by if you want the things to move." And I can say that for a decade now, Morocco has moved a lot forwards in terms of infrastructure, in terms of services. But still, I mean, Essaouira was, like I said, the marginalized city. It became, I would say, we started hosting filmmakers and we became famous also worldwide with our argan oil. So setting up a lot of NGOs when women had a great role in the region where I come from because of their cooperative, working on a cooperative and being able, because my capital was the human. This is how I really developed the city, because of its human side, because I wouldn't have any even taxes. When we're talking about taxes, I mean, maybe they were getting something like 5%. I mean, we were gaining something like 1%, because people who will go and run after the tax and weren't just in their real position. And most of the city patrimony was just given for $5 a month or $10 a month, and even the authorities were abusing. So there were a lot of authorities abused, and of course, I would say there is corruption. And I would also sensibilize the citizen that it's the right to get a paper without paying $1 or $2 tipping, because it became a tradition. And I said, no, you cannot. Or the other access, I would say, and the other innovation, and we were talking yesterday with Ben and Professor Arthur, I had these small business cards, and everybody had my phone, my mobile number on it. So I was accessible to everybody. Not all of them would call me, but all of them will feel secure to know that if there is anything, they can always reach me.
That's great. And so we've heard that color, green space, access to the water, access to City Hall, access to you, working particularly as a leader with women. Clearly, you're like access, but we'll come to you in a few minutes. Ellis, can you talk perhaps for a few minutes, and we'll like to have the two of you talk for a couple more minutes, and then open up for Q&A. And I'm being told we have limited time, so I apologize. Go ahead, please.
Thank you, Arthur. A pleasure to be here.
Thank you.
I manage a program at the Inter-American Development Bank that deals directly with intermediate cities to assist them with their medium-term sustainability. Understanding city sustainability as a city that can provide a decent quality of life while preserving physical and environmental assets for future generations' use. And the quality of life aspect is not just because it's the normal aspiration of any human being. It's because without good quality of life, a city cannot be competitive. It's going to be very difficult for that city to attract investments, and it's going to be very difficult then for that city to create productive jobs. And without productive jobs, believe me, we will never break the cycle of poverty, less so inequality. Intermediate cities are the fastest growing cities in Latin America. They represent today 25% of GDP, and by 2030 they will represent 40%. They're getting migration from the rural areas, but more importantly, they're getting migration also from the capitals, from the metropolis, where quality of life was not what it used to be, and where productive jobs opportunities are not what it used to be. So one of the challenges that maybe I'll crowd out to the audience using the techniques we were taught this morning is that on the mobility side. And the metrics are more or less the following. Latin America, together with North America, is the most urbanized continent in the world, with 82% of the people living in cities. The 82% figure is impacting, but more impacting is the dynamic. We were only 40% in the 50s. What it means is that dynamic of the fast, rapid urbanization has really transcended, superseded any planning capacities at the state, city, or even federal level. What it means is our cities, or these cities, experience an increasing population in multiples of 4 to 5 during the last 40 years. The urban footprint, the physical space associated with that, grew in multiples of 10 to 12, which means that the sprawl was brutal, was obviously very disorganized, very chaotic. And what it means now is that we have mobility systems that really don't connect the city. We have cities where commute time between home to work, work to home is about 4 hours. Public transportation systems that, with few exceptions in Colombia and perhaps Curitiba in Brazil, are not very efficient and are not very safe. You have to spend about a couple of hours of your daily salary paying for this inefficient public transportation. And then you have the 8-hour shift plus a 4-hour commute. It's very easy to make the math. It's a great incentive for informality and for staying at home selling anything, sometimes things of high value added. No? So we also have the following challenge, is that Latin America will keep on growing, probably, albeit at a slower pace, but will keep on growing. And which means is that we're going to double our income per capita in the next 10 years. We're going to take some people out of poverty, not so sure about the inequality aspect, no? But because we're still far below the intense use of cars, we're about a fourth of what the car use is in North America. What it means is that a lot of that increase in income per capita is going to go to the acquisition of cars, mostly used cars. So our numbers indicate that the fleet of cars is going to increase by 80 million in the next 10 years. No way in the cities that we work that people and the cars can share the same space. As a matter of fact, our strategy has been to take public space, green space, away from citizens and give it to cars. In the sort of metrics we run, we're closely to 80% for cars, 20% for people. That's just not sustainable. That model cannot really accommodate a decent quality of life, cannot make cities competitive, cannot attract investment, cannot create productive jobs. So that's a big challenge we have. Not all the cities have, besides the finances, to be able to have efficient public transportations. Not every city can afford a metro. Probably 7 or 8 cities in Latin America can do that. And the rapid bus system, which is a very interesting system that was originated in Latin America, has its own limitations. After your city is 400,000 or 500,000 people large, you have to think about different methods, no? Which brings me to one of the other challenges we have, and it's not easy for these intermediate cities to have the public finances to pay for efficient public transportation, which creates a second challenge because obviously society cannot pay full tariff, no? And how many minutes we have? Uh-oh. All right, so I'll leave it up to that, and maybe we can pick it up later on in the discussion.
We'll have time for a question and answer. Professor Weiss.
So
Thank you.
I'll be brief. I'm the only thing between Arthur meeting his first grandson. So let me cut my remarks short. But I was chief of staff to the mayor of Boston for his last term, including on April 15th, 2013, when 2 bombs ripped through the finish line of the Boston Marathon, and also through hundreds of our residents and our visitors from around the world. And one of my first tasks in that moment was to be his eyes and ears on Boylston Street. It turned out that he was in the hospital unrelated, obviously at a very unfortunate time. One of my other first tasks in that moment was to help start the relief fund, the One Fund, that was meant to channel the generosity that came in from around the world to the survivors of that attack and to the families of the victims. And we distributed $60 million to those people in 75 days. All private money, that fast, that large, completely unheard of in American history. To give you a comparison, it takes just about twice that long to get a passport in this country. Okay, and we distributed $60 million to people to spend as they wished. What does that have to do with our conversation today? Well, one quick aside, the Prime Minister's story of talking to the authorities at the EU reminded me of a story when the IRS did not want to grant nonprofit status to our new nonprofit. They told us we should hire a PR person to tell the American people they couldn't give money in this way. And I had the same exact thought the Prime Minister had, which is, no, I'll hire a PR person. And indeed, but what I'll do is I'll go to the New York Times and I'll have a headline that reads, IRS wants money intended for bombing victims. So one common theme here is that sometimes the local municipality, the city, needs to just say what they feel and not be afraid to go to the public with it. But what I really wanted to tell you about it was that the local foundation wanted us to go through them. And instead, we wanted to start something new. And that is what has to do with this conversation, is starting something new. Everything we did in the wake of the marathon that worked so well, we had done somehow in some fashion before, and this relief fund, this separate private relief fund, not through the local foundation, wasn't the first new thing that we did. We had invented, for example, in this city, Mayor's Office of New Urban Mechanics. We invented that, and the 2 people who led it, Chris Osgood and Nigel Jacob, 2 geniuses, they invented things too. They invented the country's first mobile 311 app, an app for telling us about your potholes and your streetlights, in a way that it could tell you what your neighbors were worrying about, in a way in which it could send you a picture back of the thing after it had been fixed by the city worker, in a way in which the city worker's picture itself would be sent back to you, so that you might rehabilitate relationships between cities and their workers. They had invented those things. They invented a universal student ID card to connect students and their libraries and the community centers. They invented a City Hall to-go truck to bring services into the neighborhoods. They had invented many things out of the Mayor's Office of New Urban Mechanics, and that wasn't the only thing that we'd invented. We invented, too, an innovation district, apropos of your earlier discussion, 1,000 acres in the South Boston waterfront that had been basically parking lots, now home to hundreds of companies and thousands of new jobs. They invented that in Boston when we were there. Inventing new things is not, though, basically what people think cities are meant to do. In fact, I get the sense that this is quite in contrast to the conversation you had over lunch, perhaps. Government's role was not to invent new things, that instead it's meant to sort of implement plans given on high from top-down people. I don't think that's true. Another person who didn't think that true was an economist who coined the term public entrepreneurship about 50 years ago, 45 years before she won the Nobel Prize. Elinor Ostrom coined the term public entrepreneurship to describe a different way of leading change in the public sector, and in particular, a different way of leading change in cities, which was a much more bottoms-up, with your local community kind of leading change. Now, that sounds all very familiar to us at this point, which is we need to get rid of rigid hierarchies in government. We know that's true, except we haven't done it very well. If you think about the last time in the city that you're funding, or the city that you're living in, or the city that you're partnering with, that you decided to solve a big problem, think about how you decided to solve it. Well, we'll get up on a big table. We'll draw up the 5-year plan, right? We'll get the consultants in. They're the first ones usually hired. We'll develop an org chart. Where are the staff that we're going to hire? we still basically solve big city problems using like old big techniques. We don't use the techniques of public entrepreneurship. We don't use the techniques of starting something new. So I wanted to introduce you to those two concepts, new urban mechanics, what we started in Boston, public entrepreneurship, which is a way of leading change in a much more entrepreneurial type way. I wanted to tell you a lot more about it, but I don't want to keep Arthur from meeting his grandson. So why don't we move to questions and go from there.
Do we have a couple of minutes for some Q&A questions from our audience? Yes, please. Planner.
We have in Latin America a home deficit close to 25 million units. This home deficit is well focused in the hands of low-income, informal families or population that they don't have access to the financial sector to do a financial closure to buy a home. So it doesn't really. They really face large challenges in accessing financial resources. Later this morning, we understood. We re-reviewed that. We realized that the income is being well concentrated in 5% top of the population. When large deficits require large-size projects, so we have to change the scale of affordable housing production. We cannot produce any more 1,000 or 2,000 or 5,000 homes projects. We need to really change the scale to produce 200,000 homes. And when you change the scale, you stop building homes and start building habitats. And you need social infrastructure. And developing countries or cities have large barriers to finance all this social infrastructure in terms of schools and healthcare centers and everything. So for those two large barriers, any idea on the panel for financial inclusion of informal population and for strengthening mechanisms for social infrastructure in developing countries?
Couldn't agree more with your comment. If on top of that you add that probably between 30 to 40% of those informal settlements that you were mentioning initially are also in very vulnerable areas. And you know, we in Latin America are not a big player in terms of greenhouse gas emissions, but we are vice champions in terms of natural disaster impact. Huh? If you add into that every time there is a natural disaster impact, in our case, sea level rise, pluviosity, flooding, and hurricanes, the impact in the GDP of that particular city is between 8 to 12%. Economies that grow at 2 to 3%, it takes 4 years to recover. And because intensity and the frequency has increased, chances are it will hit again. And that this is not an item that is in the public budget. If this item was in the public budget, we will have more than financing resources to be able to take these people out of the vulnerable areas and put it in decent housing. Another option, some cities in Latin America, Rosario, an example in place, and to some other extents, Rio, have done a very interesting use of the public-private partnership by allowing the private sector to actually develop the city, but through the gains in the real estate value, and then the impact on that in the real estate tax, be able to monetize that in order to be able to pay for the public and social infrastructure. No? Rosario is probably the city that has developed this in the better way by using the land that was given to them by the railway concession when it sits. Colombia, through Findeter, is doing a lot on these things, but I agree with you. I think the scale has to go up a lot more. But when you grow up the scale, you have to be very sure that when you plan these new cities for affordable houses, for low-income housing, that is integrated within the rest. I mean, there are thousands of examples in Latin America, not in Colombia, but in other countries, where this has not been well, and this city has become like ghost cities, not integrated, and in the end, they have become abandoned.
Any other answers for how you scale this? I mean, the scale, for someone who spends a lot of time in India, they need 22 million new homes right now. It's of that scale. Or you go to Egypt, which has 6 years of drought, or Syria for that matter, and they can only feed 40% of their population with their existing agriculture. So this climate change, these kinds of issues, we have not begun to address in any thoughtful and scalable way.
Are there any examples, Ellis, of the opposite? Sorry, thanks. Of balanced, harmonic, socially integrated urban development projects in Latin America that you're familiar with?
In Campinas, which is a city on the outskirts of Sao Paulo, it's actually a satellite city of Sao Paulo that has 1 million people now and was only 100,000 probably 10 years ago, but because of this effect, it has. They have a couple of projects there that are working quite well and that are integrated, and where they have a blended mix of use, both residential and commercial, and within residential, they have low income and middle class. And those two are working quite well.
Last question, please. Thank you. And then I want to show you one thing at the end, please.
It's actually not a question. It's more a thank you note to Prime Minister Rama. I'm the only one wearing a $4 pair of shoes around here and not a black suit. It's because I'm sort of like an artist too. And I thought for a long time that I was like a weird person because politics and art is something that I never thought it worked together. And actually I had the opportunity to help people through my art, through my work, designing logos for small businesses and things like that. And to have to hear all you have to say today is actually empowering, and it's sort of like the most empowering thing that I've heard today. So I would like to first of all thank you and
That's great. What a nice way to end it. Thank you.
Well, it doesn't mean that you are not weird anyway.
So I just want to show you that the city that you were building earlier, speaking of scale, was actually, let's see if I can get to it. This is actually the model of New Songdo City, which was built over the last 10 years in South Korea. It's exactly the dimensions. I just called it Butrent. And most of it's built. It's probably 4 years behind schedule, but it's next to Seoul, between Seoul and the airport. And that's the plan that they, after trying to figure out the best cities in the world, so you can get on the web and check it out. And that is something that's been scaled because they were able, in fact, on the first weekend, they put 2,500 housing units up for sale. They had 100,000 people lined up to buy the housing units, with 65,000 had already lined up their bank financing. So I can tell you there's huge, insatiable demand in these markets, and it is scalable at some price point. So thank you all very much. Thank you to our guests. Thank you, Megan, for coming, and we look forward to looking at your new building in a couple of years here. So appreciate it. Thank you.